start. My name is Federico, aka Fes for the Decentraland community. And we're going to talk today about governance, decision making, and agency in a decentralized environment. This will be basically a quick overview, a picture of the current system of the Decentraland DAO. Okay, so again, talking about Decentraland. For the ones that do not know what is Decentraland about, Decentraland is a virtual world owned by its users, and it's an open source platform based on Ethereum blockchain. So within the Decentraland platform, what you can do is basically to create, to experience, and to monetize all the content within the platform. So Decentraland, for me, it's basically about new opportunities of the users of Decentraland to achieve the complete ownership and over their digital assets and identities. Some of the assets that I'm talking about are basically mana, that's the cryptocurrency token, land, that are basically the parcels of this virtual world where you can deploy those experiences, those things, and other assets as wearables, emotes, and names that are part of the economy of Decentraland. So here we have Genesis City, that is the name of that virtual world that we are talking about. And well, that was 5 years ago with the first auction of land. And that's how it is nowadays. That's like a satellite view of the Decentraland world right now. There you will see that there are a lot of experiences, a lot of things deployed. Some of the experiences that I'm talking about are, for example, music festivals, the fashion week. We've got a lot of games deploying the different scenes in the different parcels. And we've got a lot of experiences that some of the most important brands in the world have tried. So we have actually some brands that are trying and experiencing with the Decentraland, looking the future of the metaverse. So which are the organizations behind this project? So we have first the Decentraland Foundation, mainly advocated for the development platform and the dApps around the project. And we got the DAO. The DAO basically decides on the protocol smart contracts. Those are the two main organizations. They must have a good synergy, and well, that's something that we are continuously working on. The DAO is basically composed by its community, by committees, and by squads. I personally, I'm part of a squad, of the facilitation squad. And the DAO also decides about the content curation, about the fees in the transactions within the platform, about treasury management, about the community whole ecosystem, and the policies about all the things that I just mentioned. So we're going to move now and start talking about the actual policies and the governance behind this DAO. Some basics. Voting power. I guess all of you know what is voting power, but here in the Decentraland, voting power, as we say it, VP, it's contributed by mana, names, and land, the main assets that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So 1 mana contributes 1 VP, so we could be talking about the stake-weighted system, a pure stake-weighted system, but we also have names, another crypto asset, and we got land. Those parcels of land contribute 2,000 VP. How do you use the VP within the DAO? So basically, we vote on proposals. We have like a long list of proposals where the community decides what to do with each one of the different topics, and each proposal also has specific categories. But the main two type of proposals are the grants. We have like an amazing grants program, so if you are interested in funding your projects in the Web3 ecosystem, this might be a good opportunity for you. And we have the governance proposals, and governance proposals is what we're going to focus now. So we're basically talking about the social layer that someone mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And this social layer, it's a multi-layer system that's gained a lot of complexity since the beginning of the Decentraland. So we're talking also about governance facilitation. Because of that complexity in the governance system, we had to create a role to help with that and to facilitate those processes. And governance facilitation is about a lot of stuff. But we can list some of the things that we work with, and the first of them is operational routines and reporting about what happens within the DAO, collaboration among the community, collective decision making, transparency, efficiency and effectiveness with the processes of the DAO, and consensus building. Those are beautiful things to say. Those are also abstract concepts, but as I see it, as my community sees it, they are not abstract concepts. All those have to be materialized as procedures and mechanisms to set expectations and to think in the long-term predictability of the DAO. So governance facilitation, as I see it, is about being the grease for the DAO's gearbox. So what do we want? What do we want as a community? What do we want as facilitators? And I think all the people that's here wants to be something like this. We want to be Greeks in the Agora, discussing about ideas, discussing about policies, all together without bitching at each other's. But I can blame the people that say that right now we're more close to this. I can't blame them. So we're talking about the procedures, the predictability, and everything, and all the mechanisms that help us to build a better platform, a better DAO. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the three-stage governance process. And for that, we are going to talk about where do we come from. And we come from a single, the DAO, the Central and DAO started with a single poll voting system to take binding decisions. And that methodology in particular showed that it can promote polarization and zero-sum engagements. Basically, conflict and no one winning. The poll format also didn't allow time for consensus building. There was a lack of adequate assessment of impacts and implementation pathways. There was a lack of restrictions, and that meant that, and that could lead to a lot of spam proposals. That's still happening, but it's more like contained in the first stage of this process. There were no BP thresholds, so we couldn't ensure that important governance decisions were made by a significant majority. And they were non-binding. They all depended on the DAO committee to enact them, and that undermined the efficacy and the efficiency and the confidence in the DAO. So, where are we now? The three-stage governance process starts with a pre-proposal poll. That is basically the poll that we just mentioned, but as a part of a huge, a bigger process. The pre-proposal poll have a submission threshold of 100 BP, a passage threshold of 500 kbp, and the voting period lasts for 5 days. Pre-proposal polls are basically to introduce issues to the DAO and to gauge community sentiment. They do not need to be in any specific format. They can be like the whole policy, the whole structure of the policy, and they also can be just a straightforward question. When the pre-proposal poll passes, we move to the draft proposal. The draft proposal has a higher submission threshold. You need 1 kbp to submit it. It has a passage threshold of 1 million BP, and the voting period lasts for 1 week. Here is where we started to improve the whole process. So draft proposals are basically to start formalizing the potential policies of all the different topics that the DAO can discuss. And to start discussing also about the possible implementation pathways and the impacts of that policy. So we moved from a single poll, a single question, most of the time, to a process that we have the time to analyze what will be the impacts of that policy. Draft proposals must be structured in a specific way. So for presenting a draft proposal, you will need a summary, you will need an abstract, you need a motivation, you need a specification, and a conclusion. When that passes, we come to the third stage of this of this governance process, and it's called the binding governance proposal. This is where, when the voting ends, and if the proposal passes, we're going to have a binding decision made by the community. So here, the BP, the submission threshold also increased. You now need 2.5 BP, 2.5K BP to pass it. And the passage threshold is way more high. You need 6 million BP to pass that binding governance proposal. The voting period lasts for 2 weeks. So, binding governance proposal is basically to formalize the draft proposals with the implementation pathways and the different discussions and the different community inputs that we've gathered within the period of 7 weeks. Binding governance proposal also must have a particular form, so to the summary, abstract, motivation, and conclusion, we add the impacts and implementation pathways. So there's the whole structure of a policy for the decentralized DAO. Some findings after we implemented this process, this procedure, were that we were having better outcomes in terms of policy, but we were still facing some issues around engagement, something that the rest of the people also mentioned. We were having some issues also around consensus building and the policy structure. So how to build consensus? How to get more engagement? We tried with dedicated spaces within the Discord, with dedicated channels. We tried with different threads in the forum to discuss about specific topics. What we achieved was to detach the specific issues and the specific discussions from the general discussions. So if you wanted to discuss about something specific, you moved into that dedicated channel and not into the general chat. It's something basic, but it helped a lot. We were still far away from the main objectives of this, and facilitating was still complicated. And I'm saying facilitating from my position and also for the whole facilitation squad. Why was that? Well, with this presented some complications, some difficulties. The first one was to keep track and follow the discussions. The second one was that information and documentation was a mess. So if you wanted to visit a document or do a survey or something that happened a couple of weeks ago, you basically needed to scroll in the Discord to find it. It was almost impossible to catch up because of that. And there were no clear roles and responsibilities at all. So we were having really nice discussions about things, but without concrete outcomes. Plus, the fact that everything relied on the willing and the capacity of the committees and the squads to create those channels wasn't good for the DAO. It had a certain degree of discretionality. So that was not scalable at all. So we've continued researching about group dynamics to try to find some way to clear line roles and responsibilities, to try to look towards specialization of those dedicated channels, and to find out transparent and decentralized pathways and mechanisms to put this together. So the first thing that we thought was, okay, let's create more committees. The second, let's create subcommittees. The third, okay, what about commissions? And big no. Big no at all. The community didn't want to create more structure, more permanent structure. And that was okay, because again, we are talking about the decentralized environment, so it was a big no. So where did we go from there? We were stalled in the process of defining where should we move. And we found the beautiful concept of working groups. So working groups. Working groups are basically a group of people doing something. That things that the people do are towards specific goals. Those groups are domain specific, about a specific area. they are non-permanent, and they are focusing on delivering cross-functional outcomes. So how should they be for our DAO? Because it's not like you take the concept and you apply it. So for our DAO, these working groups needed to be about substantive issues, independent from the DAO core unit teams, temporary, obviously, decentralized, obviously, semi-structured, with clear roles and responsibilities, with defined objectives and expected outcomes, and they had to foster engagement and consensus building. How? How will we do that? We kept researching, we kept investigating, and we found the concept and the methodology of Delphi method. So, Delphi method, for the ones that are not used to hear this specific thing, is commonly used for public policy, for policy decision making, and some forms of qualitative research. It's a structured process. It has the figure of the facilitator, and it's basically an iterated process. Each round of surveys and questionnaires is based on the results of the previous round. So the main thought, the main thing about this is you expect that after several rounds, you will find eventually general consensus. A particularity of this Delphi method is that inputs and everything are gathered from an anonymized panel of experts. And we're going there in a couple of minutes. But this is basically how the Delphi method looks. It's an iterated process where you pose questions, the facilitator poses questions, you answer those questions. There's an analysis and reporting for that questions to jump into the next round, and it keeps iterating till we find consensus. So Delphi method it's well suited, at least thinking in terms of the theory, for for distributed and Web3 decentralized contexts. So again, it's not like you have the Delphi method and you adapt and you use it for the particular DAO. So our adaptation needed to be like merged with the governance process and that Delphi method working groups. So we had the governance process, and what we thought it was like that process has to be part of the Delphi method of the working groups. So the first thing that we thought it was that the proposal author, if the proposal author will have initial governing powers to appoint the facilitator. That means that I, for example, as a governance facilitator, might be or not part of that specific working group. If the proposal if the author of that proposal chooses to be the facilitator of that group or wants to appoint someone else, it's totally good, and it's actually better in a decentralized environment. Second thing is about we basically wanted to put away that side of experts. We want everyone interested to take part in this procedure. They are not intrinsically anonymized, so well, it's something again talking about the people that wants to engage, be part of this. Like we all know each other, and might be the process, the different surveys, the different mechanisms that we use within the working groups can have a certain grade of anonymity if we need it, but if not, that's a way. Facilitator has also the opportunity to define those group dynamics. Again, to choose the surveys, to do open questionnaires, whatever suits better for the particular topic. Well, that's what I just mentioned about the methodology and depending on the topic. And the importance of combining asynchronous and synchronous dynamics. So basically we're talking about online meetings, Discord, forum, surveys, everything combined into into the same process. So this is basically how the whole process looks like. And here we will see basically that we start with a pre-proposal poll, and if it passes, the author can promote it to a working group. When it passes and he promotes it to a working group, he must select a facilitator. He can be himself the facilitator. And we start with the call for participants. The facilitator must call for community members that are interested in these topics, and us as from the facilitation squad and me as a governance facilitator must announce the creation of that working group in every channel, the forums, Twitter, the Discord, etc. So here you will see that we have the Delphi method introduced here within the governance procedure. It's basically this flow where the questions are posed, there are participant responses. If the consensus is reached, we move to the next stage. If not, we iterate this. And here you have the rest of the governance process, where you pass the draft proposal, you review it, you approve it, and you move to the implementation and assessments, etc. But the main thing about the working groups is that governance proposals might be the main expected outcome, but the mere fact of having a summary, a place where all documentation, where all working papers are together, it's good. So if the proposal doesn't pass, and someone wants in the future to discuss about that specific topic, there will be a place for him, for her, to visit and to check what were those discussions about. So, why is this necessary? The first thing is that it's an ordered way to do things. It's semi-automated because when the proposal author wants to create the working group, it just goes as it is. He creates the working group, he starts calling the participants, he starts facilitating, and that will be all. It doesn't need a huge involvement from the core units or from the facilitation squad. And also because it's structured. The Delphi method and the working group brought structure. And all this, but still talking about a decentralized and transparent approach. So, this specific methodology, what we found is that empowers every member of this community by giving the possibility of workshopping the solutions without the need of relying on the DAO committees in the squads. It's a bottom-up policy building approach, so it's, again, well-suited for decentralized environments. It provides us with some project management tools. It's a great way to centralize documentation and working papers. And one of the most important things, and we were talking about creating more committees, subcommittees, or commissions, the fact that we don't need extra manpower, it's like the best thing, because this is only a way to organize and structure the existing human and social capital of the community. So, what have we obtained with this? We found that we could go through the governance stages in a smoothly way. We were fostering transparency because the policy building wasn't more like a black box. We were unveiling the black box. We were fostering consensus building through different tools, instances and dynamics defined by the facilitators. We found a way to consolidate, summarize the discussions by keeping the working papers available for everyone. We were setting also clear objectives, outputs, and outcomes. So we were having nice discussion about things, but we were actually defining some specific outcomes for them. And finally, we obtained empowerment and agency. So we're going to talk just a little about community facilitators and agency. And again, when we talk about community facilitators, we are talking about the people that has promoted those pre-proposal polls into working groups, and that might be or not be the facilitators of that working group, or might appoint another one to facilitate that specific working group. So, as we understand it, agency is the force behind social action. Here is like a really good tongue twister, but basically it goes that it says like the working of the agency is about bridging the existing human and social capital, the self-empowerment, and not only the self-empowerment and the capacities to manage change, but also the self-awareness of having those capacities. So when we talk about agency, we say that agency raises when the facilitator and the rest of the working group are aware of their roles in terms of representing the interests of the community. Coaching, accompanying, and training community facilitators, that's mainly my role right now, besides like helping with the design of the whole governance system, is what enhances communication, conflict resolution, and consensus building. That leads to a chain reaction, and we got a more decentralized and efficient environment, because not everything is happening in the same place. Not everything has to pass through the different squads or the committees. It's more efficient because basically not everyone has to be everywhere, and the outcomes happen. So facilitation and community facilitators is about fostering engagement, driving engagement, and that engagement drives agency and creates agency. So we have now a governance process, a clear governance process that it's working. That doesn't mean that the BP thresholds or that the BP distribution or all related to BP works like perfectly, but we have a clear way to set expectation between the parts. We have a methodology, and we have agency. And how does that look together? Well, I'm sharing some examples of how this is implemented within our DAO. And here we have, for example, the dedicated channels in the Discord. These are the active working groups right now. We have a Notion workspace for each one of those working groups, and this is what I was talking about when we said that we had places for centralizing all the documentation and everything around a specific issue. So this is how a workspace in Notion for a working group looks. You have like the general description, and well, basically the project management tools that I mentioned. We have the tasks, the calendar with the important events for the working group, such as meetings, sessions, whatever. You have the guides and procedures for that specific working group. If it has a dynamic way different from our working groups, you can like define it here. You have the most important thing again, that it's centralizing the materials, the background, and the working papers. And you have a list of collaborators and their specific roles. So you have facilitators, you have proposal writers, and we also list the interests of each one of those participants. Here's a meeting basically on Discord. We were discussing actually about strategic planning, our STAR working group, and here I was facilitating those discussions. Here we had the community member that proposed the creation of the strategic planning working group, and here we have a community member that jumped and started talking about financial planning. Here we have, well, it's just an example of that thing that I mentioned about synchronous and asynchronous dynamics. This is a mirror board for strategic planning. So we started completing it in a synchronous session. We left it open for everyone to participate. And here we have the existing work. Oh, what? Okay, well, it's one for monetary allowance that it's closed. We have the binding governance proposal approved. We have one for, well, I speak that language. We have one for the code of ethics, something that I think someone mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So it's going through the draft proposal, and actually the draft proposal passed, and we're working on the binding governance proposal. We have one working group for the headquarters of the DAO, for the actual headquarters in world, meaning that we're going to create a building within the central land to start discussing in world. This is something really important. As we have community facilitators, no one is like 100% needed for this. The community facilitator that was facilitating this working group chose to step down from the process, and another person that wanted to be more involved in the process jumped in and became the facilitator. Here, well, the whale, it's obviously about whale voting and BP distribution. This row represents the strategic planning, our STAR working group, and this one represents financial planning, a son of the strategic planning working group. So, some final thoughts, some things that we found during this month that we implemented this procedure are that. Okay, well, this was something like some systems or different systems work for different moments or different stages of the DAOs. Okay, there it is. So DAOs also allow short-term adaptability and solutioning, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to plan in the long term, considering scalability issues. Oh, what was the last one? It was an important one. Well, no matter, no problem. So what we need to do, or at least from my point of view, what we need to do is look towards automation, but we shouldn't dispense of the human proxy. DAOs are a human process, and that's what we always should consider thinking in terms of planning. Well, okay. What do we want to achieve this? Again, we want to go from this. This is how a lot of people sees us right now, to this. And these working groups. So that's pretty much all. Thanks, everyone. And before ending this presentation, bueno, voy a empezar a hablar en español un poquito. Lo que quiero... Ok, bueno, una de las cosas importantes que estaba en... No, está en solo esto. Una de las cosas importantes que quería marcar... Bueno, voy a volver todo atrás. Una de las cosas importantes que quería marcar era que pensemos la gobernanza descentralizada en términos de agencia. Siempre pensemos no solo en los procesos, sino cómo esos procesos pueden empoderar al community member más aislado, al que esté menos involucrado. Siempre pensemos en términos de agencia y cómo empoderarlo y cómo darle las herramientas para participar. Era eso básicamente. Bueno, y lo que quería cerrar esta presentación era con un dibujo que hizo uno de los miembros de la comunidad, que representa lo que es para él la historia de la DAO a lo largo de estos años. Y bueno, y los que forman parte de la DAO de Central, los que estuvieron involucrados en la plataforma, van a encontrar un montón de distintos momentos, distintos usuarios, distintos eventos que fuimos viviendo a lo largo de este tiempo. Y bueno, y este dibujo es también un NFT, de los cuales uno de los miembros de la comunidad es el dueño. Así que nada, quería cerrar un poquito con eso y que vean un poco lo que produce, lo que representa nuestra DAO para el público. Así que, a ver.
Fuerte aplauso.